What is shorthand property? If I apply multiple transition property to the single element, then it is called shorthand. Whenever I don't want any transaction in my object or element, I'll go with the default value, that's nothing but the 0. In my longhand, I can able to define only one CSS transition property at a time. Hello to all, a warm welcome to my new session on CSS animation. I'm your Revati ma'am, faculty from the Department of Computer Science, Vidhyaashram, First Grade College, the Temple of Excellence, MYSURU. So dear student, in my last session, I started with animation property. In the sense, we have discussed CSS animation and we have discussed 10 different CSS animation property. But in my today's session, I'm going to deal with CSS transition. How the object state is going to change, that is nothing but the transition. Okay, then what about CSS? That's nothing but the cascading style sheet. How we can able to apply cascading style sheet on transition. So these are the few topic I'm going to discuss in my today's session. That's nothing but the what is CSS transition and different kinds of CSS transition property. These are the topic I'm going to deal in my today's session. So let's start with the topic, that is CSS transition. Transition are the way to make web page element change smoothly from one style to another. Okay, see here, I'm going to apply some style to some object. Now, by using transition, I'm going to change the style, from one state to another. That is known as transition. Now, a transition effect could typically occur when a user over an element. So when the transition effect is going to apply, for example, think that I have a box. Now what I will do, I'll place a mouse. And when I take the mouse out, whatever the effect, whatever the changes I'm going to get, that is nothing but the transition. So smoothly changes from one state to another is known as transition. If I consider transition, we can able to specify the transition based on three property. That is nothing but the duration of the transition, speed of the transition, as well as CSS property for transition. So what is transition? Transition is nothing but object or element change smoothly from one style to another is called transition. If I consider transition, how we can able to add a transition, that is what are the steps I need to follow while adding the transition. First, what I want to define the starting state of the element or object. And at the same time, I want to define the ending state of the object. At the same time, I want to select the properties, of the element. So these are the three very important points I want to remember while adding a transition. Fine. If I consider transition property, I have several property. So I have the properties like transition delay, transition duration, transition property, transition timing function. These are the some of the most commonly used transition properties. Fine. If I consider transition, what a shorthand property. So what is shorthand property? What is shorthand property? If I apply multiple transition property to the single element, then it is called shorthand. So what is transition? A shorthand property. So what is shorthand property? Dear student, in my last class, we have discussed longhand and shorthand property. So what is longhand property? If I have only one CSS style, okay, then it is called longhand property. And if I want to include multiple CSS animation property, then we will go with the longhand property, okay. So what is transition property? It is a shorthand property. So what is shorthand property? In my last class, we have discussed longhand and shorthand. So what is longhand? Longhand is nothing but the single CSS property, okay? Single CSS animation property. Then what about shorthand? Shorthand is nothing but the multiple CSS property. Then I have one more property called transition delay. So specifies a delay in second for the transition effect. So if I consider the box, okay, usually the color of the box is red, okay. When I place the mouse on the box, the color must be blue color, okay. So what is the delay I want to specify? Okay, to specify that delay, I'm going to have the transition delay, and that should be specified in terms of seconds. Then transition duration specifies how many seconds or how many milliseconds a transition effect take to complete. So transition duration is nothing but, okay, how many seconds or how many milliseconds a transition effect take to complete. Then I'm going to have the transition property. It specifies the name of the CSS property the transition effect is, okay. Next, I'm going to have transition timing function. So anyway, I will discuss all these properties in detail with example. So what is transition timing function? Specifies the speed, okay. Suppose if I want to specify the transition speed, okay, how fastly I'm going to apply the effect, okay. For that, I'm going to have the transition timing function. Anyway, dear student, I'm going to discuss these properties with an example in my upcoming slides. Okay, fine. At the beginning, okay, see here, I'm going to have the transition property. So what is my first property? There is nothing but the transition. So when I will apply transition property? Only when I have shorthand, okay. So it is CSS transition property. This specifies which property of an element should be the transition effect. So I'm going to specify which object should have the transition, okay. For that, I'm going to have the transition property. So if I consider the example, background, width or height. Now, a transition effect could typically occur when a user places the mouse, okay. So if I consider the syntax, transition property, and I'm going to specify the name of the property. So where property is the property to which the transition effect should be applied. So in my transition property, okay, I'm going to define for which object I'm going to apply the property, okay. So this is the first property of the CSS transition. Okay, fine. If I consider second CSS property, that is nothing but the duration. So duration in the sense what? How long I can have the transition effect. So this specifies the duration of a transition effect, and that is represented in terms of seconds. So I have the property called transition duration, and it is nothing but the time duration. So where time is the duration of the transition, okay, either that can be in terms of seconds or in terms of millisecond. And what is the default time? It is 0, which means that there is no transaction. Whenever I don't want any transaction in my object or element, okay, I'll go with the default value, that's nothing but the 0. Okay, now I have this simple example program, that is program to change background color of a box from red to yellow when it is being hovered, okay, over. So in the sense what? I have the box, okay, when I, okay, move the cursor, what's going to happen? See here, I'll start with the HTML document, HTML head style, okay. I have the element selector called div, okay, and I'm going to specify the width of the box, height of the box, and okay, color of the box is nothing but background color is red. Over. Next, when mouse over, okay, background should be yellow. What is the color of the background? That is yellow when mouse hover. Okay, fine. Now, okay, in my selector, okay, in my element selector, I'm going to write transition property, okay, that is nothing but the background. So what is the background color? Red. And when mouse over, what's the color of the background? It is yellow. And transition duration is only 1 second. And I'm going to close the style, I'm going to close the head, and whatever the content you want to include, you can write in your body part. Now see here, I'm going to have my third property, that's nothing but the transition timing function. So this specifies the speed of the transition effect. Suppose if I want to specify the speed of the transition effect, then I'll go with the transition timing function. Then how I am going to represent? That is in terms of time. That is nothing but the seconds or millisecond. And if I consider transition timing function, I have the values like is, linear, is in, is out, is in, out. So the default value is. So it specifies a transition effect with a slow start. So when I want to have this slow start, okay, in my transition, then I'll go with the is. Initially slow, then it is fast, okay, and end is slow. Okay, fine. Now, linear. Linear specifies the transition effect with the same speed. So, if I want to balance same speed, okay, from the beginning to end, then I'll go with the linear. Then ease in specifies a transition effect with a slow start. If I want to start my transition with a slow start, then I'll go with the ease in. Then ease out. Okay. So if I want to end my transition slowly, then I'll go with the ease out. Then what about ease in out? Specifies a transition effect with slow start and slow end. Okay. Then I'll go with the ease in and out. Okay, fine. Now I have my fourth property, that's nothing but the transition delay. So it specifies a delay before this transition start. Okay, think that I have the box, my background of the box is red, okay. Then, okay, when the mouse over, what's going to happen? The color of the background of the box is yellow. So, the delay before my transition starts, okay. To specify that, I'm going to have the transition delay. Okay, fine. Then the syntax, transition delay, okay, that should be in time. So, the time is nothing but in seconds or milliseconds. In the sense what? The delay is represented in the form of seconds or millisecond. Now I have simple program, that is program to change the width of the box from 100 pixel to 200 pixel when it is being hovered over. Okay, so I have the element selector called div. Okay, what is the width of the box? That is 100 pixel. What is the height of the box? It is 100 pixel. And what is the color of the box? It is nothing but the blue. Okay, fine. When, okay, mouse over, what is the width of the box? That should be 200 pixel. Okay, fine. Then now I'm going to define the transition property. So transition property is nothing but the width. So width of the property over transition duration is only for 5 seconds, and transition timing function is nothing but the linear. Transition delay is nothing but the 1 second. Okay, fine. Now I have longhand and shorthand property. So there are two type of properties. They are longhand and shorthand property. So both the properties are we have discussed in my previous session. So that is nothing but the CSS animation. So in longhand property, individual. Okay, so I'm going to define individual CSS property. Then what about shorthand, multiple CSS property? So I'm going to define multiple CSS property in my shorthand. Longhand is nothing but the individual or single CSS property. Okay, fine. Now I have the fifth property. Okay, so CSS transition property, that is the transition is a shorthand property for, in the sense I can able to include multiple property. Which are the multiple property I can include? That is nothing but the transition property, transition duration, transition timing function, as well as transition delay. I can able to club these four properties together. So it is called shorthand property. So it is called shorthand property. Okay, fine. So if I consider the syntax, see here, transition, okay, I'm going to have the property, I'm going to have the duration, I'm going to have the timing function, as well as I'm going to have the delay. So where, okay, property specifies the CSS property that can able to include in your transition. Okay, so if I consider the example, the background color, width, height are the example for the property. Okay, duration specifies the length of time it takes for the transition to complete. To complete the transition, okay, whatever the amount I required, where I'm going to write in my duration. Then timing function, okay, this can be expressed in terms of seconds or millisecond. So the timing function specifies speed of the transition. Okay, and last one, delay. So to start my transition, how much delay I want, where I'm going to specify in my delay. Okay, these are the some of the way we can able to use shorthand property. So this can be expressed in seconds or milliseconds. That nothing but the delay is expressed in terms of seconds or millisecond. So I have the example here. So for CSS longhand, okay, individual, okay, I'm going to write the individual or single style. So here transition property, Okay, I can define width or background, whatever you want, you can write. Then transition duration, 5 second, 10 second or 10 millisecond, whatever you want, you can write. Transition timing function, okay, linear. Then transition delay is nothing but the 1 second. If I consider shorthand, okay, see, I'm writing all these properties together. So when I use shorthand, I can able to include multiple CSS transition property together. So what is my property name? Transition. I'll use the width. I'll use the, okay, I'll use the duration, transition timing function and transition delay. So I can able to club all these CSS transition property together in my shorthand property. So this is the way I can able to use CSS long, okay, as well as CSS short, okay. So dear student, in my shorthand, okay, I can able to combine all the transition property together. So I have the transition property called transition. Then I have the transition duration, transition timing, okay. Then, okay, I can have the transition delay. But if I consider the longhand and shorthand, in my shorthand, I can able to define multiple transition property together. But in my longhand, I can able to define only one CSS transition property at a time. Now, dear student, okay, I have the longhand and shorthand property, that is nothing but the example program for the longhand as well as shorthand property. So what is my program? Program to change width of a box from 100 pixel to 200 pixel when it is being hovered over using shorthand property. So here I'm just using shorthand property. So what is shorthand property? I can able to, okay, combine multiple transition property together, that is known as shorthand property. So here I have the element selector called div. Okay, I'm going to specify the width of the box, height of the box and background color of the box. Now when mouse over, what is the width? It is 200 pixel and I'm writing the transition property in one single line. So this is the example for your shorthand property. Okay, so I'm going to specify the transition, okay, duration, timing, okay, all these things I'm going to write in one single line. Okay, fine. Now in CSS we can apply multiple transition to a single element using transition property. Okay, when I want to apply multiple transition to a single element, for that, okay, we use multiple transitions. The order of the properties in the transition property value matters in the sense, okay, for the single element we can able to apply multiple transition, but while applying multiple transition we have to remember that the order of the transition is very important. Okay, fine. If I consider the example, okay, I have CSS, okay, longhand as well as I have CSS shorthand. So what are the property I can have? I can have the proper transition property, that's nothing but the width, duration is nothing but in seconds or in milliseconds, and transition function that should be linear, okay, transition delay that is mentioned in terms of milliseconds or seconds. Next, transition property I can have weight, okay, transition property I can have, okay, transition duration is 5 second, linear. So how many style I'm going to define for single element? So this is my style 1, okay, and this is my style 2. So how many transition? 2 transition for this single element. So this is called multiple transition. If I apply okay, multiple transitions for single element, okay, then it is called multiple transition. Okay, fine. Then see here, okay, I have the shorthand, okay, which is equivalent to the longhand property, width, okay, then duration, linear and delay. Once again, I'm going to specify the height, that is nothing but the property. Duration is 5 seconds. Okay, timing is nothing but the linear and delay is 5 seconds. So how many values, how many transition value I'm going to define here? Two different transition value. Okay, fine. This is the way I can able to apply multiple transaction. This is the simple program to change both the width and height of a box from 100 pixel to 200 pixel when it is being hovered over using shorthand property. Okay, so what is my selector name? Div. Okay, width is 100 pixel, height is 100 pixel, background color is blue. Over. Then when the mouse is over, okay, width is 200 pixel and height is 200 pixel. And here this is nothing but the multiple property, multiple transition property. Okay, so I'm writing the transition property width, okay, then time, linear, duration, height, time, linear and it is delay. So it is duration and it is delay. So this is the way I can able to include multiple transition. Okay, so dear student, in my today's session I started with what is transition, how to use the transition, what are the different kinds of property we can have in our transition. Transition is nothing but how an object, okay, changes its state from starting state to ending state is nothing but the transition. State change is itself called transition. Along with that, we have discussed some of the longhand and shorthand properties. Along with that, we have discussed multiple transitions in CSS transition. Anyway, dear student, in my next session, I'm going to deal with HTML5 and SVG. Okay, so anyway, dear student, let's meet in the next session with more information about HTML5. Until that, keep watching and keep learning. Thank you.